Hello everyone. We meet again to explain Activity 2 or Document 2 as found in your book, which is about the anatomy of the reflex action. Now before we proceed, let us have a close look at the word anatomy, since it would give you an idea of what the lesson is about. Anatomy is the study of the structure or the internal working of something. So, it is obvious that we are going to study the structure and the working of the reflex action. Our last session was about the myotatic reflex, as you would recall. Today, our session will cover the points which are shown on slide 2. Slide 2, as you would observe, has 6 points. The first point would be a recalling knowledge on the reflex action and its anatomical unit. Then we will proceed to study the organization of the structures involved in the myotatic reflex, which are the structure of the spinal cord, the role of the spinal nerve and its roots, the structure of the muscle, the role of an element or a structure found in the muscle, which is called the neuromuscular spindle, and finally we're going to have a schematic interpretation of the myotatic reflex and indicate the involved structures. We're going to start with the recalling knowledge, which is found on slide 3. As you would read along, we started with the definition of the reflex action. The reflex action, as you now know, is an automatic, involuntary, and innate action in which the brain doesn't participate. The nerve center is the spinal cord. This is why the next slide is going to be dealing with the organization of the spinal cord. Now, below we have a chart which is quickly reviewing the elements needed for the reflex action, starting from the receptor, the sensory neuron, nerve center, motor neuron, and the effector organ. We have also learned that the muscle responds to its own stretching by contraction. This is the myotatic reflex. So, the question here is, how are the structures involved in the myotatic reflex organized? Slide 4 is showing you the first structure to be dealt with, which is the spinal cord. As you know, the spinal cord is a nerve center which is an extension of the encephalon. It is found in the spinal duct of the vertebral column and is related to the organs of the trunk and the limbs by the spinal nerves. Now I'm going to show you the spinal nerve here and the adjacent figure. As you would observe, this is the spinal nerve here. This is a spinal nerve and this is another spinal nerve. So here we have a pair of spinal nerve, one here and the other one here. Now, as you would observe in the document, the spinal nerve is connected to the spinal cord, this is the spinal cord here, by two roots, one root here and another root here. So this is spinal nerve which is going to be connected to the spinal cord by the following two roots, 1 and 2. Each root here has a name. This root here is called the ventral root, which is also found here. This is the ventral root. Ventral anterior root, also referred to as anterior root. Now, the root here is called the dorsal posterior root. This is the dorsal posterior root, and this is another dorsal posterior root. As you would observe here, we have the name. So now you know that the spinal nerve is going to divide into two roots, which are the ventral anterior root and the dorsal posterior root. And we have a pair of spinal nerve, each on one side. One spinal nerve here, another spinal nerve here. Now let's have a look at the structure of the spinal cord itself. But before I go to the spinal cord structure, let me call your attention to the spinal ganglion. As you would observe, this structure here, which looks like something round, is referred to as the spinal ganglion, which is found in the dorsal root. It has a role which we're going to discover later. Back to the spinal cord structure. If you observe the middle here, you're going to see a butterfly or like a letter H structure, a butterfly structure or letter H. This one is called the gray matter or the gray substance, which is made up of cell body and naked axons of the fiber. It is central, that is, the location is central in the middle. Now, at the peripheral here, we have the white matter, which is made of myelinated axon. Now, the following document, the adjacent document is found in your book on page 206, document B. You can refer to it. After dealing with the structure of the spinal cord, the next point to be discovered is the role of the spinal nerve and the role of the roots of the spinal nerve, that is, the dorsal and the ventral root. Now, this brings us to the following three questions here, which we have to answer at the end. What is the role of the spinal nerve, the dorsal and the ventral root? Which is colored in blue because I will be using the following result here, the result of the section, to answer the following question, which is in blue. The next question is, what is the direction of the nerve message and the roots of the spinal nerve? Here I colored it in orange since I'm going to be using the result of the stimulation after the section here, in addition to the following experimental procedure, which you're going to observe here, A, B, and A, B. Now, the third question is about where are the cell body of the sensory and the motor neuron found, that is, the localization of their cell bodies. This we're going to be using the experimental result found at the middle, colored in green, which is showing you here a degeneration. As you would observe here, they wrote the word degeneration as a legend, that is, the green color is signifying degeneration of the following structure. This is why I colored it in green. I colored the question in green. These experiments were performed by Bell and Magendie, which is found in document D in your book on page 207. You can refer to it if the document here is not clear. Now, let's start with our first question. What is the role of the spinal nerve, its dorsal and ventral roots? We're going to look at the experiment here. Done the experiments. We have three experiments. We have a sectioning of the spinal nerve, sectioning of the ventral root. Remember, this is the ventral root, the spinal nerve. The following is the spinal nerve here. And we have sectioning of a dorsal root. This is the dorsal root found here. Now, let's start with the first one. When they sectioned the spinal nerve, sectioning means cutting. Okay, cutting, that is separating the cut area from the other area which is connected to the spinal cord. When they cut or when they section the spinal nerve, this is the sectioning here and this is the sectioning here, what they observed was a loss of motor activity and sensitivity in the region innervated by the nerve. The meaning of region innervated by the nerve is that the region to which this nerve is going, to which this nerve is found. So here, the structure which is innervated by the spinal nerve shows a loss of motor activity, that is, it cannot perform any motor action, and a loss of sensitivity. So this would cause you to reach a conclusion that the spinal nerve must contain fibers which are responsible for motor action and which are responsible for sensitivity. Therefore, the following nerve is having fibers of the motor neuron and the sensory neuron. This is why we say that the spinal nerve is a mixed nerve. Now, we go to the second experiment here. Sectioning the ventral root. This root here, when it was cut, when it was sectioned, they observed that they had a loss of motor activity in the region innervated by the nerve, but it maintained the sensitivity. That is, the region here connected to the spinal nerve can no longer perform any motor action. Therefore, the ventral root must carry motor neuron, therefore it is responsible for motricity. So far we have discovered that the spinal nerve is made up of motor and sensory fibers, so it is a mixed nerve. The ventral root, this root here, is motor, since it caused any damage to it causes a loss of motor activity but maintains sensitivity in the part where this nerve goes. Now we're going to go to the third experiment here. When they sectioned the dorsal root here, the root here, it was cut. When cutting the following root, they observed here that the sensitivity in the area innervated by the nerve was lost, but that area, that part could still do motor activity. Therefore, the cutting here of the following dorsal root has damaged certain fibers in here which are responsible for sensitivity. Therefore, it contains the sensory neuron, making this dorsal root sensory.